Hello, Martha Alderson here, Plot Whisperer. This is the last of our series, How Do I Plot a Novel, Memoir, Screenplay. This is step 27. I assume that you've been watching all the other steps 1 through 26, and now we get to the end. I've tried to format this series by taking you through the process of actually writing a book. So we started at the beginning of writing a book, got through the middle, got to the end. Now we're at the last step, which is the resolution, which generally comes about one scene or one chapter before the end of the entire book. And so what you want to be sure of is that the climax is the biggest moment energetically of the entire project. It's the crowning glory. It's what every single scene has been building up to, is this big moment in the story, and that hits almost at the end of the book. It's about a chapter or a scene before the end. And that scene of the climax is energetically so intense and so forceful because the protagonist is facing her greatest foe, and she is going to show her transformed self in scene going up against her greatest fear, so that we as the reader gets to see the transformation in all its glory. Once that happens energetically, the story is over. There's no more energy to take the story any further. So don't let your story ramble on and on and on and on, which is not, it's typical for writers. You know, we don't want the story to end. We love these characters. We want to tell everything that happens to them after the climax, all the great things, all these different aspects. And so the story can just start to dwindle away, so that rather than feeling like you have the climax, it's this big moment, and then some of the things are resolved, and then boom, the story is over, and the reader is left really wanting your next story. They'll be like a fan waiting for the next book that you produce because they love the first book so much. But if you get into the trap of letting the story just sort of peter out or dwindle away by closing up every single plot line, you know, trying to say, well, this is what happened to this character, this is what happened here, you lose the power and the emphasis and the real true storyline, because really, thematically, the story is the primary plot line. It's not all the secondary plots, it's not all the subplots and the secondary characters, it's the primary plot. So the primary plot comes up to the place of climax, and then you're going to come to the resolution in a scene or a chapter after that, and you will resolve the primary plot. You won't necessarily resolve all the subplots or what happens to all the secondary characters, because if by not doing that you allow the reader to be more interactive. They'll ask their friends, did you read this book by this great author? What do you think happened to so-and-so at the end? They didn't really say. I kind of think this is what happened. And you get sort of an interactive, you know, conversation, dialogue, wanting to understand what's going on. So as long as you do the primary plot at the end and have it resolved so that the reader knows, okay, now that this has happened, now what? How have her fortunes changed? How has the protagonist, because she faced her greatest foe, what is her life now like? And that we get sort of a taste of that. Okay, so anyway, I just read a book that I love, this novel that we're doing in my book club, and or in our book club, and I thought it was fantastic. It was very thematically driven. It was powerful in terms of the themes. It really made you think. It gave both sides to the story in a very compelling way. It was character driven, although there was a lot of, you know, dramatic action, but we really got to know the characters. At the end of the story, after the climax is so dramatic. But the story goes on. I should have counted how many pages. It's scene after scene after scene, trying to tie up for all these secondary characters. And yeah, it was interesting, but I was reading to the end just because I wanted to finish the book, but I was a little bit perturbed. It was like this doesn't feel like it's critical to the story. It feels like the reader, the writer was just not wanting to let go of the character, sort of. And that happens more often than not, where the ending is sort of ruined in a little bit, just because the pacing isn't quite right and it doesn't end quite quickly enough. And the ending, I love to say, beginnings hook the reader, but endings really create fans. So you want to be really clear about the way you bring the story to climax and how you resolve it and how quickly you resolve it at the end, so that you keep the reader as a fan that's hungry for more, that it's not just petering out and they put the book aside and it's like, oh, yawn, that was great, but it went on a little too long or whatever. Then about the resolution too, that I think is fascinating, is that because the character is transformed at depth over the dramatic action that happens in the story, and she rises up to the climax to do whatever the deed is that she has to do, the way the story resolves in the last chapter or last scene is wanting to show how the world, her world, is changed now that she has evolved. She is no longer the same. She's been transformed at depth. And who she was before is dead. That died at the crisis. And she now has risen up at the climax to show who she is now. The resolution is an opportunity to show what happens when a transformed individual returns to the ordinary world. Because there's no way that that world can remain the same. That world too will be transformed, because the protagonist is coming in evolved. She's gone through an evolution, and because of the evolution she's gone through, she will help change the community around her. So in other words, think about how you're going to end it at the end. It's not just happily ever after. It's not the way that every other book has ended. Try to bring your ending to a new place where you'll show the reader a new reality, a new sort of opportunity for an evolved sense of being. And then the reader is left with this gem where they take it to heart because they've lived this story through the character, and they too have been transformed, and now they're going to bring that same gem forward in their lives, just as the protagonist dwell in her world. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so you don't want to necessarily leave the story in status quo. It can never be the way it was, because one of the individuals in the ordinary world has been transformed. So you don't want to restore the status quo at the end. You want to show the world evolved. Anyway, that's the best I can do for now. So let me just tell you, if you want to do a plot planner for your story, or if you want to do a scene tracker to track your scenes scene by scene throughout the story, or you want to create a plot based on the 27 steps that we did in the YouTube series, feel free to get my book, Blockbuster Plots Pure and Simple. It takes you by the hand, walks you all the way through how you create a plot planner or a scene tracker. And I do have a book coming out called, as of now, the working title is Plot Whisperer, and it will be on bookshelves the first week in October. It's fast-tracked to be out this fall. So I hope you'll take a look at that in the fall too. That will sort of help support all these steps. It just goes into a lot more detail. And these two books will sort of support each other, the Blockbuster Plots and the Plot Whisperer. So, thank you for following. Oh, and I just wanted to say, stay tuned because we have a whole new plot series starting. It will probably be in the next month or two. We're going to take what we discussed here in the 27 steps and we're going to take it to the next level. We're going to show the direct application of these so that I can give you more concrete descriptions and examples of what we talked about and how it shows up in stories. So you can take the concepts, the conceptual stuff, and bring it down into the concrete form in your own writing as well. Thank you.